The Billionaire's Runaway Bride Part 1. Chapter 1, The Wedding That Wasn't. The bells of St. Aldwyn's tolled like a clock counting down to doom, each peal trembling through the old stone and into Sophie Wyndham's ribs. She stood at the altar beneath a canopy of white roses and family expectations, satin skirts pooled around her shoes like a pale tide. Sunlight spilled through stained glass, ruby, sapphire, emerald, painting her veil in shards of jeweled light. Somewhere out in the nave, a child laughed and was hushed. Somewhere, her mother's bracelets chimed as she folded her hands tighter. It was a beautiful day for a fairy tale ending. It felt, to Sophie, like the edge of a cliff. Lord Percival Harrow, Viscount of Everley Park, waited beside her with the smile of a man who believed he had already won. He was all straight lines and polished edges, pewter hair precisely parted, an immaculate boutonniere tucked into the lapel of a tuxedo that fit him like a verdict. His eyes were the color of unlit steel, cool and faintly reflective, as if he could see himself in everything, including her. "Our moment," he murmured without turning his head, the words a courtesy rather than a kindness. Sophie's fingers tightened around her bouquet until the stems creaked. The florist had tied the roses with antique lace from her grandmother's hope chest, lace everyone kept calling blessed, lucky, priceless. Against her wrists it rasped like a whispering rope. She inhaled the perfume of crushed petals and starch and beeswax polish, and underneath it all the human smell of 100 expectant bodies, powder, cologne, old wood warmed by breath. She could not seem to pull enough air into her lungs. She had told herself it would be easier once she reached the front of the aisle, once all the walking was done, once there was nothing left but the words. But the aisle had been the last place in the room that belonged to her, a thin runway of movement, a line of escape masquerading as progress. Standing still was worse. Stillness turned into weight. Weight turned into certainty. The pearls at her throat were suddenly too tight, a polite necklace becoming a constraint. How many times had her mother fastened little clasps like this with the same sing-song blessing? "Wyndhams don't run, darling. We rise." She tried to rise. She lifted her chin and found the Wyndham family pew. Her father sat straight-backed, mouth stern, eyes careful. He had given her away like a man endorsing a contract. Beside him, her mother dabbed under one eye, though the tears never actually fell, they stayed there like jewelry, glittering and performative. Her cousin Eloise winked with a sympathetic wince that said I'd die too. Aunt Beatrice was already calculating which magazine would want the exclusive. There were cameras behind the columns, discreet as vultures. Sophie forced herself to look at Percival. It was what everyone expected, the wistful gaze, the beaming bride. He had good features, symmetrical and composed, and a reputation as solid as a stone bridge. He financed conservatories, chaired committees, bred horses with ancient names. He had proposed to her in a private dining room with a ring like an ice floe and a speech that had been nearly perfect, perfect enough to drown out the small voice that kept asking where she was in all of it. He loved partnership, legacy, tradition. He loved the Wyndham name, certainly. He loved, in his way, the idea of her. Breathe, she told herself, a command as soft and futile as a falling petal. The priest's book rustled. The congregation, that strange many-headed creature, shifted and sighed and leaned forward as one. Sophie felt the room tilt, as if the cathedral had decided to bow to Percival too. She had not slept. The night before was a blur of silk-lined boxes and last-minute seating charts and her mother's voice saying, "The Harrows are as old as England, Sophie. This is security." Security was a sensible word. It wore beige and practical shoes. It did not make your pulse feel like a frantic bird trying to tear free. Security did not make you imagine rain on your face and wind in your hair and your own name, said aloud by your own mouth, in a way that sounded like a promise. Her maid of honor reached around to flick a speck of lint from the veil. Sophie flinched as if struck. The veil fell back into place, a cloud with a mind of its own, fuzzing the edges of the world. The lace tickled her upper lip. She could taste infinitesimal threads. She pressed her tongue to the roof of her mouth, fighting the urge to gag. It was ridiculous, she was ridiculous, and yet panic does not negotiate. It only multiplies. Percival's gloved hand came to rest on top of hers, a gesture meant to soothe, to claim, to steady. His skin was warm. His fingers were steady. He did not squeeze. He simply covered. Almost there, he said, and for a split second she saw the rest of her life the way he saw it, the house with 20-foot hedges and a gravel drive, christenings and committees, supper at 8 with a decanter breathing on the sideboard, summers that smelled like cut grass and submission. She saw herself in a series of framed photographs, lovely, composed, increasingly silent. The priest lifted his eyes. His voice, when it came, was sonorous, the kind of voice that had blessed 1,000 unions, comforted 1,000 griefs. Words rolled out like brocade, binding, sacred, everlasting, all those adjectives with iron bones cloaked in velvet. Sophie's heart tripped on them, stumbled, scrambled. "Dearly beloved," he began. The congregation murmured back its dutiful response. Sophie felt heat crawl up under her skin, across her chest, the way panic sometimes imitates fever. The cathedral was too bright and too dark at once, the jewel tones suddenly garish, the shadows suddenly deep. Her breath snagged. Her throat tightened. The bouquet slipped a fraction in her grip as her palms dampened. She thought of the girl she had been at 12, barefoot in the garden, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, promising herself she would cross a country someday just to see what the sky looked like from the far side. She thought of the woman she had been yesterday, nodding along as the hairdresser built a helmet of pins, admiring a stranger's reflection. She thought of the 3 words she was expected to keep all her life: I do, yes, forever. And then, with startling clarity, she thought of a different set of words entirely: I can't. Not like this. The bells outside fell silent, leaving behind the soft tremor of their absence. In the pause, a seagull cried somewhere, insolent and free. Sophie's lungs, traitors that they were, drew in a breath that tasted like decision. The priest turned a page. His thumb dragged a neat arc across the gold leaf edge. He smiled the smile of ritual, of inevitability. Do you? Everything inside her answered at once. Not words. Motion. The bouquet flew first, not thrown, simply released. Roses tumbled in slow motion, a white spill against the black and gold of the altar rail. Sophie's feet moved before she knew they had decided to, satin whispering, tulle sighing, heels flashing like signals beneath her hem. She slipped from Percival's hand as easily as a ribbon slips from a knot. Gasps broke over the pews in a shivering wave, the collective inhale of a story turning sharply left. Sophie, her mother's voice, brittle with disbelief. Sophie, her father, warning and wounded. Somewhere, a camera shutter chattered in ecstatic staccato. Percival said her name like a command and then, louder, Sophie. He did not reach for her. He did not move at all. He stood very straight, the way a portrait stands. Sophie didn't look back. Looking back was how statues were made. The aisle that had been a procession became a runway, became a lifeline. She gathered the skirts in both hands, her palms streaked with cool damp from the crushed stems, and ran. The world narrowed to a tunnel of faces, round O's of mouths, wide coins of eyes, hats tilting, programs fluttering like white flags or white flames. Her veil snagged for a heartbeat on a pew finial. She yanked and it tore with a delicate sound like a sigh giving up. She kept running, lace trailing, pearls thudding against her collarbone in tiny terrified heartbeats. At the back, the great doors stood ajar to the noon. 2 ushers stumbled out of her way, their expressions a tragicomedy of scandal and awe. The final strip of shadow crossed her face like a last attempt by the church to claim her. Then she was through it, into air that smelled of rain coming and city and freedom, into a light that didn't belong to anyone. The crowd outside recoiled and then surged, phones rising like a silver forest. Someone shouted her name. Someone else shouted her fiancé's. A reporter tripped over a cable. The sky, blank moments ago, now seemed enormous. Sophie stopped for a fraction of a second on the top step, chest heaving, veil streaming like a wounded flag. In that pause she felt it all, the horror, the relief, the extraordinary wrongness of what she had done, and the even more extraordinary rightness. Her life, neatly packaged and ribboned, had just burst its seams. She lifted her skirts again and took the steps 2 at a time, the stone cool under thin soles. Horns blared. A bus whooshed past, splashing the curb with yesterday's rain. A sleek black car slid toward the curb and came to a clean, feline stop, windows dark as mirrors. A door opened with a soft, luxurious click. Behind her, the bells began to ring again, not the solemn knell of ceremony, but an alarm, a chase. Ahead of her, the street widened like a dare. Sophie ran, the hem of her gown swallowing city grime, the lace at her throat finally loosening as the wind clawed it back. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she was gone. Chapter 2, Into the London Rain. The instant Sophie's satin heels struck the wet pavement, the wind caught her veil and yanked it sideways like an impatient hand. It whipped across her cheek, damp from mist and the breathless heat of running, before tearing free entirely. She didn't even glance back to see where it landed. The stone steps behind her already teemed with a mixture of guests, journalists, and bystanders, a living wall of disbelief and flashing lenses. The sound was chaos, gasps, shouts, the heavy clunk of cameras being raised, the pop of bulbs flaring against the dull, pewter-colored day. The London sky hung low and swollen, pressing down on the streets like it was conspiring with the city to keep her in. Rain had begun again, not the gentle drizzle that softens the edges of buildings, but a purposeful, soaking sort of rain that seems to know where to seep in. The cold reached through her silk gown, a rude, bracing contrast to the cloying warmth of the cathedral. It chilled her arms and shoulders, but it also felt cleansing. The dress had been designed to float like a cloud, instead, it clung to her knees, the heavy skirts already mottled with damp. She turned down the first street she saw without thinking. Her heels clicked hard on the slick pavement, then slipped slightly on a manhole cover, forcing her to catch herself with one hand against a lamp post. A passing taxi blared its horn. A pedestrian in a navy raincoat stepped aside quickly, eyes darting from her face to her gown, recognition dawning in the tiny pause he made before hurrying on. She knew what he was thinking, they all would. London wasn't the kind of city where a bride could vanish unnoticed. The sound of her name, shouted, urgent, cut through the traffic. She didn't turn. Somewhere behind her, a pair of photographers were giving chase, their voices bargaining with one another for the best angles. She ducked her head, clamping her hair to her temples in a futile effort to shield herself, and kept moving. A bus roared past close enough that the spray from its wheels caught her face. She blinked it away, swallowed, and darted across the street during a lull in the traffic. Car horns protested, but she didn't care. The idea of being caught, of being turned around and marched back up those cathedral steps, tightened her stomach like a fist. Ahead, a line of parked cars glistened like beetle shells in the wet. A black umbrella bobbed above a couple hurrying in the opposite direction, and for a second Sophie imagined herself in their place, two people with nowhere to be but together, no audience to please. The thought burned so suddenly in her chest she almost missed the sound behind her, the distinct hiss and purr of tires rolling over puddles at a steady, deliberate pace. She glanced over her shoulder. A sleek black car, low, gleaming, and clearly not a London cab, was pulling alongside her. Even through the rain-dappled window, she could see her own pale, startled reflection. The car matched her pace for a few beats before the back window slid down in a seamless whisper of expensive engineering. The man inside leaned slightly forward, into view. He was impossible to miss, sharp lines softened by the kind of confidence that didn't need to announce itself. His dark hair was swept back, a few errant strands curling just enough to suggest he hadn't fussed with it too much. His suit, dark charcoal, possibly bespoke, looked like it had been cut with him in mind, draping in precise, effortless folds. The collar of his crisp white shirt was open just enough to let you know he didn't care about the rain. And his eyes, warm brown, but quick and assessing, met hers in a way that made the rest of the street vanish for an instant. "You look," he said, his voice wrapped in a low, rich Spanish accent, "like you could use a ride." Sophie didn't move. Her instinct told her to keep going, that getting into a stranger's car, billionaire or beggar, was dangerous. But instinct was complicated right now. Her heart was still pounding from the dash out of the cathedral, the adrenaline making everything sharper, more vivid. She began, but he interrupted, gaze flicking briefly over her sodden dress. "Not every day you see a bride running through the rain." The faintest trace of amusement touched his mouth. "Unless it's in a film." "This isn't a film, is it?" Her lips twitched despite herself. "No," she said, the word tasting half like a lie. From behind her came the quick, hollow slap of more footsteps, the photographers closing in. He noticed, she saw his eyes shift to the movement over her shoulder, then back to her, his expression narrowing into something like calculation. "I can get you out of here," he said, not raising his voice but somehow cutting through the noise. "But you need to decide now." The rain ticked steadily against the car roof. Sophie hesitated for a heartbeat longer, her mind tugging in two directions, one toward safety, the other toward freedom. Then the shout of her name came again, closer this time, and the choice was made for her. She stepped forward, gripping the door handle with fingers gone slick from the rain. The interior light bloomed in soft gold, spilling over leather seats the color of dark caramel. Heat rolled out from within, carrying the faint, expensive scent of something woodsy. As she slid inside, the man gave a short nod to the driver, and the car eased forward into the grey sweep of the London street, leaving behind a spray of water, and a dozen unanswered questions, in its wake. The door closed with the solid, final sound of something sealed. And for the first time since she'd run, Sophie felt the smallest, most dangerous flicker of relief. Chapter 3, A Proposition in the Rain. The hum of the engine was low and steady, the kind of sound that could lull someone into calm if not for the chaos Sophie had just fled. Raindrops smeared across the tinted windows, blurring London into streaks of grey and gold, like an oil painting someone had dragged a wet brush across. She sat on the far side of the leather seat, her gown billowing awkwardly between her and the man who had just plucked her from the street. The warmth inside the car was instant, almost indecent after the cold outside. She could feel her skin prickling in response. She pushed damp hair away from her face, leaving tiny wet trails on her cheeks, then looked sideways at him. He was watching her, but not in the way Percival used to, not weighing her like a potential investment or cataloguing her appearance for public display. This man's gaze was sharper, more curious, as though he were piecing together a puzzle and she was the unexpected corner piece. "I should thank you," she began, her voice still a little breathless. "I think you just saved me from being trampled by the press." The corners of his mouth curved into something between a smile and a smirk. "I didn't stop for the press," he said. "I stopped for you." Sophie tilted her head, unsure whether to be flattered or cautious. "Why?" For a moment, the only sound was the muted swish of the wipers. His eyes, dark and rich as fresh espresso, held hers. "Because," he said slowly, as if measuring the weight of each word, "you looked like someone who had just made the most important decision of her life, and had nowhere to go afterward." She blinked at him. "You don't know anything about me." "That's not true," he said, leaning back. "I know you were meant to marry the man in the cathedral. I know you chose not to. I know you ran through the rain without an umbrella. And I know," his gaze dipped briefly to the trembling bouquet still clutched in her lap, petals battered and bent, "that you are not going back." The precision of his observation startled her. "And who exactly are you, to be so certain?" He extended a hand across the seat. His cufflink glinted, a small silver crest she didn't recognize. "Alexander Torres." The name clicked somewhere in her memory. Tech empire. Luxury brand acquisitions. The Spanish billionaire the tabloids called the tycoon who doesn't miss. A man as elusive as he was visible, if the gossip pages were to be believed. She hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was warm, decisive. "And you?" he asked. She hesitated again. "Sophie," she said finally. "Sophie Wyndham." His eyebrows lifted slightly. Recognition dawned. The Wyndham fortune. Hotels, shipping lines, Old English money. He said it like reading a headline, but his tone was laced with something wry. A very proper name for a woman who just bolted from her own wedding. She should have bristled, but there was no judgment in his voice, only interest. "Where were you going?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted. That was when he leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on his knees, his eyes narrowing just enough to make her aware of the space between them. "Then maybe," he said, "you should marry me instead." Sophie stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me." His smile deepened, like a man enjoying a private joke. "Think about it. You're already dressed for the part. You've just publicly walked away from an arrangement that was probably more politics than love. And he spread his hands lightly, I'm in need of a very convincing fiancé at the moment." She gave a sharp, incredulous laugh. "You're joking." "I never joke about business." "That's what this is to you." "Business." "Not entirely." His gaze held hers a fraction longer than was comfortable, a flicker of heat beneath the cool logic. "But for both of us, it could be useful. You disappear from your current scandal by stepping into another story entirely. I solve a problem of my own." Her instincts prickled. What problem? That, he said smoothly, is something I'll explain when you decide you're interested. Before she could answer, the car slowed at a red light. A group of pedestrians crossed in front, several of them glancing toward the car, not at her, but at him. One woman actually stopped to nudge her friend and whisper something, both of them turning to stare as they passed. The flash of a camera outside made Sophie flinch, but Alexander didn't so much as glance toward the window. If you stay in London, he said evenly, you'll be photographed in doorways, in alleys, through restaurant windows. Every frame will tell the same story, the runaway bride who embarrassed the Harrows. But if you leave with me, then I'm just the woman who ran off with a billionaire. He tilted his head. Which headline would you prefer? The light changed, and the car slid forward again. Sophie turned to watch the rain-slicked streets retreating behind them, feeling the rapid tick of her pulse in her wrists. I don't even know you, she said, more to herself than him. You will, he replied. And in the meantime, you'll have somewhere to go that isn't back there. Back there, the cathedral, the gasps, Percival's fixed, disbelieving stare, was the last place she wanted to be. She thought of the press already swarming outside, of her mother's voice on the phone, sharp and disappointed. And she thought of how, for the first time all day, she wasn't running anymore. The driver turned onto a broader street, and Sophie could see the shimmer of the Thames in the distance. Alexander Torres sat beside her, perfectly at ease, waiting. She swallowed, the question in her mind twisting into something dangerously close to agreement. Chapter 4, A Private Jet and a New Life. The decision had been less a leap than a slide, a smooth, inevitable motion towards something she couldn't name yet. By the time the car curved into a private terminal far from Heathrow's main crush of travelers, Sophie felt the change in her bones. She wasn't in London anymore, not really. She was already in Alexander Torres's world. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time the car door opened for her. A man in a dark overcoat, clearly staff, though his easy smile was nothing like the stiff formality of her family's butlers, stepped forward with a large black umbrella. The smell of jet fuel mingled with the damp air, the tang of it strangely exhilarating. Alexander emerged first, coatless despite the weather, his suit still immaculate. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing the world would simply make room for him. Sophie followed, her gown hem already spotted with darker stains from the city streets, her satin shoes clicking on the wet pavement. The jet waiting at the end of the tarmac looked like it had been painted in liquid midnight. Sleek, gleaming, its fuselage reflected the runway lights in long, unbroken lines. A flight attendant in a perfectly tailored uniform stood at the base of the steps, greeting Alexander in Spanish with a warmth that suggested familiarity, then glancing at Sophie with polite curiosity. She half expected someone to stop her, to demand a passport or boarding pass or at least an explanation of why she was there in full bridal attire. But no one did. Instead, Alexander's hand came lightly to her back, guiding her toward the stairs with a simple, "After you." The cabin smelled faintly of citrus and leather. Cream-colored seats faced each other in pairs, each one more like an armchair than anything she'd ever seen on a commercial flight. The wood veneer of the fold-out tables had a deep, polished sheen, and there was a small bar stocked with crystal decanters and slender bottles of champagne. She stepped inside slowly, almost cautiously, as though the jet might vanish if she moved too quickly. The hum of the engines was distant, a low vibration she could feel through the soles of her shoes. Alexander shrugged out of his jacket, draping it neatly over the back of one seat before lowering himself into another with the ease of a man who had done this hundreds of times. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the seat opposite. "You'll want the view on takeoff." The flight attendant appeared with 2 fluted glasses of champagne, bubbles swirling in delicate spirals. Sophie hesitated only a moment before taking hers. The cold stem felt good against her hand, grounding her in the surreal moment. Alexander watched her over the rim of his glass, still deciding if this was a terrible idea. She gave him a small smile. "I think I've gone past that point." He didn't look away. "Good." The engines deepened in pitch as the jet began to move, rolling toward the runway. Sophie glanced out the window. The rain made the airport lights bloom and shimmer, a dreamscape of gold and silver dots. The acceleration pressed her gently into the seat, her heart climbing with the altitude. Below, the city's gray edges fell away, replaced by a quilt of lights and dark stretches of river. London looked far less menacing from here, as though the drama she'd left behind was nothing more than a whisper in the night. When the seatbelt sign clicked off, Alexander leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Barcelona first," he said. "My home, my base. From there, we'll see." Sophie arched an eyebrow. "You make it sound like I've signed on for a tour." "You have," he replied simply. "A tour of my life. If you're going to play the part of my future wife, you should know the stage." Her pulse skipped at the phrase future wife. He'd said it so casually, as if it were already set in stone. "And what exactly does this part involve?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tipped his head slightly, studying her as though the answer depended on her more than on him. "It involves being seen with me. Trusting me. Letting the world believe in us, until they have no choice but to." She took a slow sip of champagne, letting the fizz tingle on her tongue. "And what's in it for me?" "A clean escape," he said. "And maybe more than that, if you're willing to see where it leads." The way he said it, the quiet certainty, the weight of possibility under the words, made her set the glass down before her fingers betrayed the tremor running through them. The jet leveled out above the clouds, the cabin now bathed in the soft golden glow of the overhead lights. Sophie leaned back in her seat, the hum of the engines a steady backdrop, and realized with a strange rush of exhilaration that she had no idea what tomorrow would look like. All she knew was that it wouldn't look anything like yesterday. Chapter 5, Champagne and Secrets. The jet had settled into its rhythm now, a smooth, almost imperceptible glide through the night. Outside the oval window, the world was reduced to layers of darkness, the deepest black of the sky above, the soft charcoal sweep of clouds below, and, here and there, the faint pinpricks of distant lights that could be cities or ships or something else entirely. Sophie's gown made a soft rustle every time she shifted in her seat, an almost absurd reminder that she was still wearing the trappings of the wedding she had just abandoned. The hem was wrinkled, the train bunched inelegantly around her legs, but the bodice still held its shape, the pearls still gleamed faintly in the cabin's warm light. It was as if she were suspended between two realities, one still wrapped in tradition and ceremony, the other streaking toward something entirely unknown. Alexander sat across from her, his jacket discarded, his shirt collar open just enough to suggest relaxation rather than carelessness. He had one arm resting on the armrest, the other loosely curled around his champagne glass. He hadn't stopped watching her, though not in the way Percival used to. There was no ownership in his gaze, just appraisal. As if she were an equation he intended to solve. He was the first to break the silence. "So, the Wyndham heiress runs away from her own wedding. Do you want to tell me why?" Sophie's fingers traced the condensation on her glass. Do you want the polite answer, or the true one? I don't collect polite answers, he said simply. She smiled faintly. The truth is, I couldn't do it. The ceremony, the vows, the life that would follow. It wasn't about Percival, exactly, though God knows we weren't suited. It was about what marrying him represented. It was like I could see the next 40 years lined up, neat as soldiers, and I couldn't breathe. Alexander nodded slowly, as though filing that away. So you ran? Yes. She hesitated, then met his gaze. And you? You see a stranger in a wedding dress on a rainy street and you decide to whisk her onto your private jet. That's not exactly standard behavior. His smile was quick, a flash of something both amused and private. No. But I'm not in the habit of doing what's standard. She arched an eyebrow. So why me? He leaned back, his champagne glass catching the cabin lights. Because I recognize a kindred spirit when I see one. Someone willing to upend their life in a single decisive moment. That's rare. And right now, rare is exactly what I need. There was a pause, just long enough for her curiosity to thicken. You mean for your business? A faint nod. I've just closed one of the largest acquisitions in my company's history. The deal is clean, for now. But there are people who'd love to destabilize me. Investors, rivals, old enemies. They'll go after anything they can use, including my personal life. A sudden, very public engagement to someone the world knows by name. He gave a small shrug. It makes me unpredictable. Harder to target. Sophie swirled the champagne in her glass, watching the bubbles rise like tiny golden lanterns. So you're saying I'm a decoy? I'm saying you're an ally. If you choose to be. Her first instinct was to bristle, but there was something in his tone, frank, unapologetic, that disarmed her. He wasn't pretending this was a fairy tale. He was offering her a transaction, yes, but also something else. A challenge, perhaps. And in return, she asked. He gave her that slight, deliberate smile again. You get out of your scandal. You get a clean slate in a different city, far from London society and its gossip. And, his gaze lingered for a beat, you get the freedom to decide what comes next for you, without anyone else's permission. Freedom. The word landed in her chest like a key turning in a long-locked door. For a moment, she didn't speak. The steady hum of the engines filled the silence, mingling with the faint clink of glass as Alexander set his champagne down on the table between them. You're remarkably persuasive, she said at last. I don't persuade, he replied. I offer. People decide for themselves. And what happens if I decide I don't want to be part of this? Then I have the pilot turn us around, and I drop you anywhere you want. No harm done. His expression was unreadable. But I don't think that's what you'll choose. Her lips curved despite herself. And you're so sure of that because? Because, he said, lifting his glass once more, you didn't run from the cathedral just to go back to being who you were before. He was right. She knew it, even as she sipped her champagne to hide the fact. The taste was crisp and effervescent, but beneath it, she could feel the weight of the choice settling in. Somewhere over the channel, Sophie realized that her flight away from the altar had carried her much further than she'd planned, and that Alexander Torres was not the sort of man you could remain a bystander to. Chapter 6, The Billionaire's World. The jet descended through a night sky so clear it felt as though Barcelona had been set on display just for her. From her window seat, Sophie could see the sprawl of the city, each street a golden thread in an intricate tapestry, the dark sweep of the Mediterranean glimmering where it met the shore. The lights clustered densely near the harbor, spilling out into the hills in elegant, curving lines. Alexander sat opposite her, appearing as composed as he had hours ago when he'd pulled up beside her in the rain, but now there was a quiet restlessness in him, the kind of alert energy people carry when they are about to walk into their own territory. He didn't bother to point out the landmarks coming into view, instead, his gaze lingered on her, assessing, as though wondering how she'd react to what awaited her below. The landing was seamless, the kind of touchdown Sophie had only ever experienced in first-class flights that still felt like commerce. This, though, was something else entirely, no bustle of passengers, no crackling intercom announcements, just the soft, low thrum of engines winding down as the jet taxied toward a private hangar. The moment she stepped out onto the warm tarmac, the air hit her, softer, saltier, threaded with something citrusy from the city beyond. A waiting car, sleek and silver this time, pulled forward, and the driver, in a dark suit, opened the door for her before she could even think to reach for it herself. Barcelona at night was nothing like London. The streets were wider, the buildings a blend of old-world grandeur and modern glass. Stone balconies spilled with ivy, narrow side streets curled away like secret paths, and everywhere, the air seemed warmer, more forgiving. It was only a short drive from the airport before the car turned into an underground entrance, the hum of the city fading as they descended into a private garage lined with polished marble pillars and subtly lit alcoves. The elevator from the garage was lined in brushed steel and leather, and Alexander pressed a code into a discreet keypad before it began to rise. When the doors opened, Sophie stepped directly into his penthouse, no hallway, no shared landing, just an immediate transition from elevator to empire. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls wrapped around the main living area, revealing the city spread out below like an illuminated map. The Mediterranean stretched away in the distance, its darkness punctuated by the glitter of ships and the faint white line of surf along the coast. Inside, everything was a study in contrasts, cool marble floors softened by deep, hand-woven rugs, modern steel and glass architecture tempered by rich woods and sculptural furniture. A sunken living room was arranged around a low, rectangular fire pit that flickered with clean, steady flames. Above it, a custom light fixture, dozens of suspended glass orbs, caught the reflections of both the fire and the city lights. To one side, a sleek open kitchen gleamed under recessed lighting, the countertops so pristine they might have been carved from ice. And then there was the rooftop pool, visible through another set of glass doors, glowing a deep, inviting turquoise under the night sky. The water reflected the stars so perfectly it seemed to merge with them. Sophie walked slowly, her heels clicking softly on the marble, every step echoing faintly in the high-ceilinged space. She reached the glass wall and pressed her fingertips to it, looking out at the endless sweep of lights below. "This doesn't feel real," she murmured. Alexander stepped up beside her, his reflection in the glass a darker silhouette against the city's brightness. "It's as real as you want it to be." She turned to face him. "And you live here alone?" He gave a small smile. For now." For now." The phrase lingered in the air between them, carrying possibilities she wasn't ready to examine too closely. He gestured toward the far end of the penthouse. "There's a guest suite down the hall. Make yourself at home." She glanced at him. "Guest suite? You didn't think I'd put you in my room on the first night, did you?" His tone was light, but the corner of his mouth curved as though he'd caught her off guard on purpose. She exhaled a small laugh and shook her head. You're not what I expected. And what did you expect? She considered this for a moment. Someone colder. More calculated. Less hospitable. His eyes held hers for a beat longer than was comfortable. I can be cold, he said quietly. But not without reason. Before she could respond, the faint vibration of his phone cut through the air. He glanced at it, his expression tightening for just a fraction of a second before he slipped it back into his pocket. Whatever the message was, he didn't comment on it, but Sophie noticed the way his jaw shifted, a subtle tension settling over him. Get some rest, he said, his tone lighter again, almost dismissive. Tomorrow, we'll start introducing you to my world. And as Sophie followed him down the hall to the guest suite, its double doors opening onto a room more luxurious than any hotel she'd ever stayed in, she realized that she was already inside his world. The only question was how deep she would go. That's the end of this part, but trust me, the next one is even more thrilling. We drop fresh episodes every day, so don't miss out. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned, you won't want to miss what's coming next.
Because every broken heart deserves a comeback. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional romance every week. Hit like, drop a comment, and ring the bell so you never miss a moment of romance, redemption, and powerful love. And don't keep the drama to yourself, share this story with someone who lives for twists just like you. Thanks for listening, and remember, sometimes the best comeback is becoming unforgettable.